Hi, this is John Ebelhart, and welcome to Veterans Project. With me today is Doc Manick. Doc, what would you like me to call you?
Jack is good. Doc is a colloquialism that we used in Vietnam, and that's the only way they referred to the medics was by Doc. In fact, most guys I would think would probably never really knew my real name.
Okay, so we'll stay with Jack.
Is good.
So welcome, Jack.
Thank you.
We're happy to hear you, to have you here. We're a little unique in that Jack wrote a book, a great book. We'll go into a little bit more of that later on, but they always say about can't put the book down. That's pretty much the case in that book. I picked it up and I started going through it very lightly, and then suddenly I just jumped in the middle of it. And it's a fast read, and it really does. It brings you right there. I mean, the stories were just tremendous. So we're going to start with where you were born.
Born in Rahway in 1947, Rahway Hospital.
And your schooling?
I went to, well, we stayed in Rahway for a number of years, did grammar school in Rahway, lived with my grandparents because my mother died when I was 2.5. My father remarried. And then we moved from Rahway to Island to Avenel, where I went to Woodbridge Senior High, and then the military, and then Stockton State College, and then back out again.
Okay, so you're a Woodbridge
I haven't gone more than 3 miles from where I was born in my lifetime, so okay. I love it here.
With the exception of what we're going to talk about.
Yes, that's true.
Now, this was back during Vietnam, and it was the draft was full bloom. There was a war going on. Some people call police action. It was not very favored. Now, did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted in October of '67, and I decided to enlist so I could get the job that I wanted to do, which is a medic, because my intentions were to go to medical school after the Army.
Wow.
So I enlisted. I had to give an additional year,
right?
But I figured that was worth it. So, and in the end, it was worth it.
Exactly. Yeah, the draft I think was 2 years, and enlistment was 3.
Yeah, they were grabbing everybody. In '67, they were grabbing everybody that had 2 of any appendage. You qualified, and you went, and you either went Army, or believe it or not, they were actually drafting you into the Marine Corps.
Yes, yeah, I heard that exactly. You'd stand in line to be 10 of you.
You'd stand in line, and they'd go down in 1, 2, 3 Army, 4 Marines. Right. And they'd go down in every 4th one, and these guys started crying because they knew what it was going to be like in basic.
Exactly.
The Marine Corps, yeah.
Paris Island.
Yep.
So you enlisted, you drafted / enlisted. Now you go off to what in the Army they call basic training.
Basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey for 8 weeks. And then I was supposed to go to Fort Sam Houston, and they missent me to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is where they do engineer training. And
okay, sounds like the Army.
Yeah, when I got there, I told them I was in the wrong place, and they said, well, no, we're going to make you an engineer. And I said, well, no, you're not, because I have a contract, a binding contract with the Army to become a medic. So they weren't happy with me there. They kept me there for a couple of weeks, and they shipped me off to Fort Sam, where I spent 12 weeks.
Where you belonged.
Where I belonged of medical training in Texas.
Okay, and after Sam Houston, it's now, you went to school, and now it's a little on-hands experience. Where was your first duty station?
First duty station was the 97th General Hospital in Frankfurt, Germany.
Nice duty.
Yeah, we had, it was wonderful duty. The conditions were clean, the food was good, there was no KP, there was no rifle range, there was no calisthenics. It was almost like a civilian job, and I got to learn a lot of things about being a medic because I was working in the surgical intensive care ward on the hospital. So I stayed there for 6 months, and then a lot of the guys coming into the ward or coming into the hospital were from Vietnam, medics, and they were telling me what it was like there, and I said, well, I don't know if I'm really doing that much good here, any more good in Germany than I would be doing in Vietnam, so I volunteered to go there.
So you volunteered to go, you didn't get orders to go to Vietnam?
No, I volunteered to go to Vietnam, yeah. And my father and my grandparents couldn't believe I did that.
It's understandable, yeah.
Understand it.
So now there's a great part in the book, and I'm going to refer to the book several times, on your flight to San Francisco, and this is where the journey begins. When you go into the West Coast,
right.
You're heading somewhere, and we all know where that was. You talk about the flight. It was lonely in the beginning. You're sitting in the back of the airplane. I guess everything is starting to hit you now. What's may happen to you?
It was a United Airlines DC-8 flight, and my intention, I had to go to Fort Lewis for in processing, but my best friend was living in San Francisco, so I planned it so that I would take the flight to San Francisco. I had about a 7 or 8 hour layover in San Francisco. I'd visit my friend, and then I would go up to Fort Lewis. Well, I never let my friend know that I was coming. So
Okay.
the flight was interesting. They put me at the time, the DC-8s had all the restrooms all the way in the back. There was 3 or 4 of them. And if they had excess baggage, they would just throw them on the floor in the back. There wasn't stowed underneath like they do it now. So they put me in the last seat, in the last row next to the bulkhead and across from the bathrooms. And there was nobody in the row that I was in, and I just started feeling isolated. Nobody would talk to me. They passed by me, because we had to travel in dress greens.
Right.
So they knew I was military. Nobody talked to me, and in spite of the fact that you go through all this training, basic training and individual training, you're still a person. And when people avoid you, they don't want to talk to you, you start feeling low and low and low. And I felt, after about 2 hours, I was about as low as I've ever been. And a stewardess noticed, and she kept walking by, and she asked if she could sit down next to me. And she sat down and she talked to me for about an hour. And she avoided all of her duties, and somebody else picked up her work assignments. And after an hour or so, it was like I was a different person.
Nice.
But she took the time. And I always thought that in the end that I hadn't met a person, but it was really an angel in disguise.
And,
So,
yeah. She lifted your spirits
Oh,
up.
yeah, yeah. It was amazing.
But did you ever get to see Joe?
No,
Okay.
no. I landed in San Francisco, and I knew where well, I knew the street and the house number he lived on. It was on Sutter Street. And I took a bus to the downtown bus station in San Francisco, and Sutter Street was right outside there. So I figured, how far can it be? And it was rainy, and it was cold in January, and I was wearing the wintergreen overcoats and the big saucer cap, and I started walking. I figured, I'm going to save some money. Why should I go out and spend money on a cab? So I started walking, and I started going up the hills and down the hills and up the hills. And the more I walked, the more the rain soaked into my overcoat. And then it started going over the saucer cap, down my collar, down my back, and after a while, I was like 400 pounds.
Sloshing.
And I kept looking at the numbers on the homes, and he was like number 14757, and I was down at number 800. And the numbers were going creeping so slowly. And after a while, I had no more energy. I probably weighed 300 pounds with the water. And I looked at my watch, and I had just enough time to get back to the airport to make it to Fort Lewis. Because if I didn't get to Fort Lewis on time, the military is not forgiving on you making it to a certain point. So I had to leave, and I never got to see him.
No, so you flew all the way across the country and you missed Joe.
Yeah, I thought that would probably be the last time I would ever see him. So I really wanted to make that, but I was foolish in not getting in touch with him, and foolish in not taking a cab to
Yes,
save the bucks.
yeah. But no, the salary was not much back then, so
No,
that would have been a big.
PFC was $69 a month, and I think Spec 4, which is what I was at the time, was I think $175. So
Wow.
yeah, you weren't highly paid at the time.
No.
The only thing that gave you more money was combat pay, hazardous duty pay.
Right.
So we thought that was great.
So now you leave the United States. Your first stop is Cambron Bay.
Cambron Bay, right. 22nd replacement was in Cambron Bay, and they dropped us off there, and actually our first stop was the Philippines.
Okay.
No, actually that was the second stop. It went from Hawaii to the Philippines to Cambron Bay. And at Fort Lewis, where we took jungle training in the snow, it was below zero. And I never could figure out why they would do jungle training in the snow, but they did it. So we got to Cambron Bay, it was 120 degrees, and you walked out, and it wasn't just the heat, but the humidity and the smell. The smell in the air was, they burn feces. There's no other way of taking it. There's no septic systems, they have running water, but other than that, it's all burned, and that's what you smell when you get off. So it was like, welcome to Vietnam. Here's the smells and the heat and everything. And while I was there, they gave me my assignment, which was to a combat engineer group in the Central Highlands. And they wouldn't pick me up to go there until the next day. So they told me where the PX was. So I went to the PX, and I was walking around inside, and for whatever reason that things were meant to be, I saw a friend of mine who I went to high school with.
Wow.
And we graduated Woodbridge High School. And I can't remember his name to this day. I wish I could.
What, from
and if he's
Woodbridge?
watching this movie, please contact me. But from a distance, we saw each other, and we're looking, and we're saying, you know, you're 12,000 miles from home in a hostile, you know, fire zone, and there's your buddy in the PX. So, you know, we exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes. He was going home that day, and I was just coming in that day. So, oh,
He was
man.
going the right direction.
Yeah, his uniform was all faded green. Mine was all brand new, crisp, new, you know, new to country. So I was like, ah.
So you were at the 70th?
70th Combat Engineer. Well, I was with two units. The 70th was the main unit, but they also had the Vermont National Guard with us. And they were also an engineering group. There was about, I think, 189 of these guys. They had drafted these poor guys, and they pulled them right out of Burlington, Vermont on one day when it was probably 20 degrees, and they shipped them off to Vietnam.
Oh,
and these
my.
are mostly middle-aged guys, and they probably weren't in the greatest of physical shape. They hadn't come out of basic training for 10 years.
Right.
And they were over there. Nice bunch of guys, really nice bunch of guys. But so I was sent I got to base camp, stayed in base camp for about 6 weeks, and they wouldn't let me go they wanted me to go out to the Camp Swampy, but they wouldn't let me go until I had some formal medical training, if you will. I mean, I'd come from working in a hospital, I'd come from 12 weeks of book learning, but that doesn't qualify you to be a medic in Vietnam.
Right.
You need, if nothing else, you know how to bandage people up, you know how to splint people up and all that. But you don't know how to treat them for tropical medicine, for diseases, for colds, for bronchitis, for pneumonia. And they kept me there, and they gave me a mentor, another medic who had been in country for a long time. And when there was sick call in the morning from 6 till 9 in the morning in base camp, they would have him stand next to me, and a patient would come in. I'd have to diagnose the patient. I'd have to figure out what to give him. And if I came up with the right diagnosis, the guy would say, okay. If not, he would say no, and he would tell me what I did wrong. And I had to do that, and I had to learn 150 different prescribed drugs.
Hence the moniker doc.
What their uses were, and because you give somebody the wrong thing, you could kill them.
Sure.
And there was nobody else out in some of the camps, but the medics. The battalion surgeon was only in base camp. So
You were the doc.
yeah, that was
were the
it.
doc.
Yeah.
Now, you flew out on a fairly nice DC-8. You had a ride on a
From Cameron Bay,
C-130.
to the Central Highlands was a C-130, and no seats in it. It was just you sit on the floor, and there were nylon straps across the floor, and there was a bunch of us, and they told us to sit down, and they also told us to hold on to the straps. You know, I'm not going to hold on to those straps. Well, why would I want to do that? Well, the C-130 is a short takeoff and landing airplane, so it goes down like this, and then it goes like this.
Straight up.
And as it started going like this, I started going backwards because I didn't have a hold of the straps on the floor. I mean, you weren't going to go too far, but it was like, oh my God, I should have held on to these straps. I'm just sliding backwards, and everybody's watching me going back to the end of the cargo bay. And I'm like, oh man, what a flight.
So now is this Camp Jerome you went to?
Camp Jerome was base camp. Stayed at Camp Jerome for 6 weeks. Did all the learning that I had to learn, and then after 6 weeks they would send me out to Camp Swampy.
Okay. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment.
Welcome home, man.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're here with Jack Doc Manick, and we're discussing, we're in Viet Nam now, and you're at Camp Jerome.
Correct.
You just came in from Cam Bay. What was, now this is not, Cam Bay by comparison was a little nicer than Camp Jerome?
Not by much.
Not by much, okay.
Cameron Bay, Cameron Bay, I'm sorry, I was thinking of Ban Me To It. No, Cameron Bay was a lot nicer.
Right.
It was a huge, huge base. It was mostly, when I got there in early '69, it was almost all, it's like a tent city.
Okay.
Tents all over the place, equipment all over the place. And they just started building permanent buildings at that point in time, which is why they had the PX and they had some other features. But later on, when I got there, 6 months later, 7 months, they had tennis courts, basketball courts. They had blacktop roads. They had plants outside
Wow.
of permanent buildings. It was like they had people that worked in weight rooms, lifeguards. I mean, it was, if you didn't know that it was a war zone, if you didn't see the barbed wire and you didn't get the occasional rocket in, you'd never know that you were in a war zone.
You were in a resort.
Yeah, Cameron Bay was that big, and there were a few other areas like that.
But Camp Jerome wasn't quite like that.
No, Camp Jerome was.
You mentioned something in the book, and again, I'm going to refer to the book, about blind shaving, and for those of us in service, we know what that's like. It's pretty scary.
Well, I lost all of my, or left all of my shaving equipment in Cameron Bay, and when I got to Camp Jerome, they let me go for about a day and a half without shaving, and they said, no,
It's not going to work.
you're going to have to do it. And I said, okay. I had a razor. I didn't have any shaving cream, and I had a bar of Lux soap. They always used to, I don't know why but they had Lux soap. I had no mirror. I'm like, okay. They said, you've got to shave. So you put the soap on your face and you just start shaving. And it was with the double-edged razors that were very unforgiving of mistakes that you make. And after shaving half my face, I kept feeling a burning sensation. And then I shaved the other half, and then, because I was actually, the water from my shaving was in my steel pot on a wooden box in the middle of a road somewhere. So that was the shaving facilities, was any place you could find to shave. So when I started splashing the water on it, started burning more and more, and I had a white towel, and I put the towel and started wiping my face, and it turned out it was like streaked with red. I had sliced my face all up. So I went to the medical tent, and the guys just stopped when I walked in. They all looked at me. They go, what the heck did you do to yourself? I said, what do you mean? So they said, go look at the mirror, and they had a nice big metal mirror. And I looked, and it was like, oh my God, it looked like I'd been in a knife fight somewhere. So then they gave me some stuff. They said, well, you can't leave it that way. You've got to put alcohol on it to disinfect it. And when I put the alcohol on, it was like living death. It was like lightning bolts going through my head. Then they gave me some other stuff, some disinfectant called benzalkonium chloride. I didn't realize it was red liquid, and I didn't realize that it stays on your skin. It wears off. So by the time I was done, it looked like I had Indian war paint but I had to do it because of, an infection in Vietnam was just as bad as a bullet.
I can imagine.
So that was my dry shaving, my blind shaving.
Just the word to our audience out there, by pot, there was not actually a pot. That was your helmet.
Steel
upside
pot,
down.
we called it our helmet. Yeah, it was used for just about everything.
So you had a unique shaving experience, and in the book you also, your weaponry was fairly unique. Now, everyone got their issue, their standard issue, but you went above and beyond the cause.
Well, standard issue in early '69, they were just converting to the M16, and the infantry got all of the M16s up front. It wasn't like they had enough to supply everybody. So we still had the old wooden M14, which was a good weapon, but a very heavy weapon. And I wanted to carry as much ammunition as I could, so I was seeking an alternative form of protecting myself. And I made friends with a Special Forces guy when I was in Ban Me To It. And he said, well, I can get you a Thompson submachine gun. I go, wow, not realizing that weighed more than the others. And I gave him the money, and he came back about 2 weeks later. He says, I can't find it, but I've got you an M2 carbine, which is a 30 caliber carbine. And the M2 had a selective fire switch on it, which allowed you to fire full auto or semi-auto, and it was light.
Right.
And he gave me all the magazines for it. So I bought that from him for $50, and that's what I carried for the remainder of my tour.
Okay.
But I just had a problem because I had no ammunition for it. And he had no ammunition for it. But somebody in Camp Swampy had ammunition for it and wouldn't give it to me.
Oh.
That's another part of the...
Yes,
of the-
yeah, we'll
of
go
this-
into
yeah.
your acquisition of ammunition.
Yeah.
Another unique experience is while you're in camp, for what reason, unbeknown, why they would want a medic to have a driver's license. They wanted you to get a driver's license.
Before I left Camp Jerome, the powers to be decided I needed a driver's license, and I could not figure out why. I pleaded with them. I said, I'm not going to drive a truck. I'm not going to drive, even though I eventually, I had the experience of driving them around for a little bit, but they made me get a driver's license. And I had never driven a standard transmission before, never. It was all automatic. So one of the people in the medical tent said, this guy knows how to drive, he'll take you out. So in Camp Jerome, which was a huge camp, they had a number of roads within the camp itself. And then they had a large hill that went up to the top, and on top of the hill was where they had the communications center. So I drove this Jeep around. I learned how to drive it around. It was fine. I'm driving around on the flat. Everything is good. I figured, okay, I know how to drive this Jeep. It's going to be no problem passing the exam. Well, the exam was the next day, the driving exam. 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm waiting out, I'm waiting, and there's no Jeep coming by. And all of a sudden, I see this huge 2.5-ton truck coming. He stops and he blows his horn. He says, get in. I said, what do you mean, get in? He said, I'm your driving instructor. And I'm going, oh, man, you got to be. Those weren't the words that I used, but
Exactly,
that
yeah.
was the feeling I had. So I climbed up into the cab, which is about 7 feet off the ground, and I'm looking at the controls, and they look nothing like the Jeep controls. The Jeep controls it was a 3-speed with a reverse, but where the shifting pattern was actually drawn or labeled on the dashboard. Mm-hmm. So you know this is first, this is second.
Right.
Well, this 2.5-ton truck, deuce and a half that we called it, had nothing there. There was no shifting pattern. There was about 6
Yes.
levers on the floor, and I'm going, oh my God, how am I going to drive this thing? But they showed me, and I learned how to drive it around on the level. But for some reason, the final thing I had to do to pass the driving test was to drive it up to the top of this hill that was about a 40-degree grade and shift once on the way up. I'm going, okay, no problem. I know how to do this. I'm driving along in first gear, and I get about halfway up, and the motor's screaming. I try to shift in the second, and all I hear is this grinding noise. I'm now in neutral, effectively. The vehicle is still going up, and I'm double clutching, I'm triple clutching. And finally, the vehicle stops, and me and my driving instructor just sitting there looking, and it starts rolling down back the hill. And the hill had drop-offs of maybe 500 feet on one side. Oof. And if we would have gone over the side, we would have rolled the vehicle, and that would have been it.
It's over, yeah.
And I tried, and we're going backwards, and I'm trying to steer, looking. And the instructor yells, hit the brakes. I said, okay, why didn't I think of that? I hit the brakes. Well, the brakes weren't balanced properly. The right brake was braking more than the left, so it started to pull us towards the embankment and over the side. So I let go of the brakes, and went through this whole thing for about 5 minutes, and we finally got down to the bottom of the hill, backwards, and his eyes were this big, and my eyes were about that big.
But you're alive.
But we're alive, and he said, look, okay, we'll do this one more time. Don't shift. Just go up to the top of the hill. We get up to the top, and he says, fine, you got a driver's license. You get out. I'm driving you back down the hill. So it was crazy. I don't know why they made me do that.
Now, your job was to go out on missions with the actual the group, and we'll get to some of those missions in just a moment. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen.
After a car accident, Linda Davis needed CPR. Bill Hamilton needed temporary shelter when a fire destroyed his home. During an operation, Haley Reynolds needed a blood transfusion.
Excuse me, may I go into that room, please?
Next year. Revenue growth, again, will be a focus. Top priority.
Thank you for giving me blood.
Thank you for giving me shelter.
Thank you for saving my life.
Support the Red Cross and change a life, starting with your own.
Welcome back. Again, we're here with Jack. Jack, we were going to talk about some of the missions that you, as a medic, had to go out with this engineering crew. You'd have guards stationed, and because people would try to hurt these guys who were trying to build bridges and whatever. So they had guards there, and obviously you, in case something happened. Can you take us on just one of the missions and what it was like to be out there, possibly being fired at?
Generally, we had very few medics in the compound. So one medic would stay in the compound, one would go out with what they called work crews. And the engineers would go, there might be 3 or 4 work crews doing different things. Bridge demolition, because we had gotten there just after 68 Tet, when the NVA had blown up all the bridges in the area. So they were trying to not rebuild the bridges, but blow up what the NVA had already started taking it and put some temporary bridges up. But they'd go out and they'd build compounds. They would build it. And they worked on the roads too. The road infrastructure was a big thing to keep going. So I mean, I would go out when I first got there with usually the work crew that was out the farthest from camp, because they posed the most danger. So whatever they'd be doing, I'd be out there with them, and if I was needed at one of the other work crew positions, they'd radio these guys, and they would take me by jeep, and I would take care of whoever was injured. But one medic always had to go out with the work crews, and one medic always had to stay in the compound,
In the base camp.
in Camp Swampy.
Now, there's again in the book, there's an interesting story about and night is probably the worst time in Vietnam, because that's when the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong decide to make your lives miserable.
Sure.
And there's an interesting story about a rubber plantation, which is right next to the base or near the
Yeah,
camp.
we were, one side of the base that we were at was bordered by a rubber plantation that we found out Andre Michelin owned. And then on another side, we actually had a banana plantation, and then there was a coffee plantation in a different direction. So all 3 of these they're money makers. They don't want anything to happen. But the rubber plantation was the most critical of all. They didn't want us to shoot into the rubber plantation. And they sent out specific orders to us not to do it in top secret crypto, which meant only the radio operators knew what the translation of the code was. Well, the NVA found out within a week what was going on. So they started shooting at us from the rubber plantation.
From there, yeah.
And then, not small arms, they started shooting B-40 rockets. So every night it was another attack. I mean, you couldn't venture far from your bunker in the evening because of the B-40s. And they would injure guys sometimes. A lot of times they'd destroy equipment. And the commanding officer kept protesting to the battalion commander to let us fire back. And the answer was no, because of the monetary loss that could happen. And after about 2 months of this, our commander said, he actually sent a message to the battalion commander and said, we're ignoring your order. If fired upon, we will return fire.
Good for him.
And that night they got everybody on the side of the berm, which is like a dirt wall, that faced the rubber plantation, and we knew that they were going to shoot at us that night. They had done it every other night. As soon as the first rocket went off, everybody started shooting, and it wasn't like we were shooting at a person. We were just shooting to
in there, somewhere in there.
And they destroyed about half the rubber plantation. But we never got shot at again from the rubber plantation. That was
the right decision.
We thought it was worth it.
Absolutely, right decision. So there was a lot of violence going on there, but there was one incident that, I guess, again, time off, a little levity. I think, again in the book, it's called The Great Corn Caper.
The indigenous population to Vietnam were called Montagnards. There were different tribes, different clans like the American Indian. And they were agrarian. They grew crops. And one of the main roads, QL-21, which went by our compound over to base camp, which is about 40 or 50 miles away, passed by a number of villages, and they grew corn. And we just kept, sometimes I'd go in for supplies, and I just noticed the corn getting higher and higher and higher. And you know, for a GI who's eating canned this and creamed this, the corn looked awful good. So my friend and myself, another medic, Johnny Clark, we decided we were going to get some corn. So we borrowed a Jeep, and we went up to the cornfield, which went right to the road. And we got out, and we started crawling through the corn. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and he says, "Why?" The corn was 7 feet tall. You could have walked through the stuff. And here we are crawling through the corn. He says, "Why are we crawling?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "You started crawling, so I started crawling too." So we get into the cornfield, and we forgot to bring something to put them in, like bags or so we're ripping corn off and sticking them in our shirt and our pants and everything. And we ended up, I think, with about 37 ears of corn. We went back to the bay, to Camp Swampy. Now how to cook it. We didn't want to give it to the cook because he'd make cream corn out of it and ruin it. So in the medical bunker, we decided we got some. They used to ship us Ritz crackers from home in cans. So we figured we'd take a can, and we'd heat it. We'd put water in it, strip the corn, throw a few corn in, and then we'd heat the water with C4, because C4, the explosive, is a great thing to heat up. It burns with a blue flame. You just can't disturb it too much while you've got the thing, going.
Yes.
Well, we put the corn in, we put the water in, we made this makeshift stove. We lit the C4, and it's starting the water's starting to boil, and all of a sudden we hear this noise. And we look around the side, and the water's dripping out the side of the can. Well, every can back in the 60s was soldered, seam soldered, and the C4 was burning so hot that it actually was melting the solder, and the water was coming out of the can. So we couldn't use that. So we ended up using alcohol burners, which, if you're in a chemistry class, they're these little things, and it took us 4 hours to cook 2 corn. And as we're peeling the corn, though, to put them in the water, we're looking at it, and I'm going, oh my God, it was colored corn. It was Indian corn. And we didn't know whether we could eat Indian corn or not, but we figured, well, after all that effort, but it was good.
You're going to eat it. That's right, yeah.
And what was left, well, I think we ate about 15 corn. We took to the mess sergeant, and we let him cut it up and give it to the guys. But that was the great corn caper. That was never to be done again.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned the solder, because that takes us to something else that the scary part about being in Vietnam is that some of the people there didn't want you there. They didn't like you there. They wanted to hurt you. So you mentioned the solder in the Ritz can, but just even a stop for a cold soda could have been harmful to you.
Along the roadside, the children used to sell us cans of cold soda, and it would be $1 a can of soda. Well, again, the problem is that the seams on the soda are soldered, and the NVA and the VC, there was 2 main things that they would try and do. If it was a bottle of soda with a cap, there's a way that you could take the cap off without any scratches or scrapes on it, so no one would know it was off. And you pour ground glass in it, and then you put the cap back on. And that was one way of destroying. I mean, it would kill whoever trying. But the other way was to put acid in a can of Pepsi or a can of Coke or whatever, and it was very easy. You took a soldering iron, you put it on the seam where the solder was, and you get a syringe full of acid, and you put the needle right next to where it's heating up the solder. As soon as the solder starts flowing, you push the needle in, inject the acid, pull it back out, take the soldering gun away, it flows back, and you've got a can of poison soda. And I got one of those while I was on a convoy once. The only way you can tell is to pour it on metal.
Okay.
And watch for the bubbles, and not the bubbles from the carbonation, but the bubbles from it eating away the metal, and that's what happened to me. So I obviously I didn't drink it. A friend of mine got a good can, and he gave it to me. But a GI will do anything for a can of cold soda.
Cold soda
Cold
in that heat?
Oh,
Sure.
man.
But so those are some of the day-to-day things. And now you also mentioned the book about an ambush that took place. And is this where you got hit?
One of the problems, we would go out and set up ambushes all the time. But we were on a patrol, a 6-day patrol, and we had about 12, 14 guys in the patrol. And when we were out there, we were not resupplied. Whatever you brought with you is what you ate, and if you needed to drink more water, you had to find water. Well, we were running out of water. And on the map, one of the lieutenant in charge, I told him, I said, we're down to 1/3 of a canteen each. And we used to carry 3-4 canteens of water. And
You need the water in that heat,
yeah,
sure.
and he found a river close by, so he redirected the column in that direction, and we hadn't gone more than 100 yards, and the automatic fire just opened up on us. And the first thing the medic thinks of is who's been hit, because usually they pick a target. It's either the point man, or they may wait until the point man goes past where they are, and they'll open up on the main column. Well, these guys opened up on the point man. So I'm yelling out, who's been hit? And they yell out, point man. I'm going, oh, crap. The worst possible place for me to go to.
Way right out in the
yeah,
opening.
because he's at least 25 yards ahead of the first guy in the column. So I dropped my pack, got my aid bag, my ammunition, and I started crawling. And I crawled from one guy to another guy, and I kept telling him, I said, when I get out, I'm going out there after this guy. Don't shoot me when I'm trying to get back, if I make it back. So I'm crawling out there, and I realized that the bullets are all over the place. You know, they're kicking up the ground. It's probably quicker just to get up and just start running and take my chances that way. So I get up and I start running, and I get about 10, 15 yards, and two guys jump up over here. So I shoot these guys, and I'm continuing to run, and I'm still looking for the guy that's down, because the weeds are high, and I hear somebody yelling, Doc. So I saw the guy in the weeds, and he'd been shot in the groin. Luckily, he hadn't been shot in the artery. Otherwise, there would have been.
Right.
I mean, I could have tourniqueted him, but usually when you're shot in an artery, it's 15 minutes, and you're pretty much bled out. You're gone. So I patched him up, and meanwhile these guys are all over the place. So I said to him, I said, "Can you walk?" Well, I weighed 150 pounds. He weighed about 250, and he was in good shape. Got him up to his feet, and he tried to walk, and he couldn't walk, and we both fell down. So I said, look, I'll try a fireman's carry, see if that works. Got him up on a fireman's carry and started running, and then I got shot in the leg, and then we both come down again. So now we're still 30 yards from the main column, and there's nobody coming to help us. And I told the guy, I grabbed him and I pulled him up to a seating position. I said, look, if you don't get up and help me to move somehow, we're both going to die here. I said, do you want to die here? Obviously, I was just trying to motivate him, because
Right.
I was scared out of my mind too.
Sure.
And I got him up, and somehow I got him into a fireman's carry. But now I had a bullet through my left calf. It wasn't a bad wound, but it hurt like hell. And every time I tried to step on the thing, it was like there was electricity going through my brain. So I tried walking, and every time I stepped down, I was in extreme pain. So I started yelling obscenities at the enemy, something to keep my mind off
Sure.
of the pain that was coming. And then I finally got back to where the main column was, but that time we were surrounded already. And they had to call in gunships, and luckily, if it wasn't for the gunships, we wouldn't have been here today.
Okay.
They called in, and then we threw some purple smoke out, but the gunships, they just wasted everything in the area. So luckily we made it out of there, but that was,
Good thing for the gunships, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So now this is, now, I was going to pass on this one, but I couldn't avoid it. Rats and cats. If you could just give us a quick version of the...
every base and compound in Vietnam had rats. The rats came because of the food and the garbage. GIs are sloppy. They throw C-ration cans, they throw food all over the place, and the rats used to actually live. We lived in tents this is in Camp Jerome, base camp. We lived in tents, and we had the old army bunks, and they put them on top of wooden pallets. And the reason they put them on top of wooden pallets was twofold. One, in the monsoon season with the rains constantly, it kept, your bed wouldn't be on, in the mud itself.
Right.
The other reason was because of the rats. The rats would actually live in burrows underneath the wooden pallets. And when I got transferred out to Camp Swampy, same thing, same rats. And we tried everything. We tried poisoning them. We tried traps. And in the beginning, only the stupid ones got caught. They got smart. The poison, I swear, made their coats look even shinier than they normally were. And so we didn't know what to do. And then we thought about it, and we said, a cat. Nature's,
Yeah.
natural enemy to a rat is a cat. Well, in Vietnam, they're delicacies. They're on the restaurant menu. You couldn't find them. Somebody found one somewhere, and he brought this cat back, and this cat was about this big, and he was gray, and he was scarred all over the place. And he was in a chicken wire cage, and this guy who was driving the truck got some welding gloves, which are like leather gloves that came up to here. And I'm saying, why is he reaching in there to get the cat with the welding gloves until he grabbed the cat? This cat was the meanest thing we'd ever seen. He was screeching and screaming, and everybody's going, yep, that's just what we need. And the pallets in the mess tent at that time were high. They were about, between the bottom of the pallet and the top, they were about this high. So we figured we could throw the cat in. Cat would kill the rats, and that's what we did. We threw the cat in, and we heard this noise, this screaming. And we're all going, yep, he's taking care of him. About 30 seconds later, the cat comes out of the pallets. His tail is curled under his leg, and his ears are pinned back, and he's real low to the ground. And he's moving, and about 3 feet behind him are three cats, 3 rats as big as he is, chasing him. So we figured what happened is he got in and ate there. He figured he was going to kill the rats, and he got outnumbered, and he figured
I'm outta here.
strategic withdrawal. But I'd never seen anything like that, boy.
So life there is, at best, miserable.
Yeah.
It's time for you to go home, time to come back to the United States, and you do something that absolutely baffles me, because I know when it was my time to get out, I could not wait. But you were ready to come home, and what did you do?
I extended for 6 months. I wanted to, I had another year left in my enlistment, and what I wanted to do was I wanted to stay another 6 months in Vietnam because I wanted to buy a car. There was a...
You were young and a pet dog?
Yeah, I mean, we got these catalogs from a car company called Carbine, where you can buy a car overseas. And I think the car was about $3,000 or $3,500. It was a British sports car. I don't remember if it was an MG or a Triumph or whatever it was, but it was low, and it was either yellow or red or something.
You had to have it.
You know, oh, I had to have it. And so I extended for 6 months for medevac helicopters, to be the medic on the helicopter, because now I would get not only combat pay, I get flight pay.
All right, right.
So I get more money. But, you know, in a 22-year-old's mind, you don't realize the fact of what might happen to you over there, or you might not make it back just for the fact that you wanted to make some extra money to get a car. But it seemed perfectly logical at the time.
Absolutely.
Even now I look back at it and I just go, holy cow.
What was I thinking? Yeah.
Yeah.
So now you do return home. And again, for those of us that were in during that time, it was not a happy time. I mean, it wasn't, you weren't, I assume, welcome home as a hero for most people.
No.
But you're coming home, you served your country well, and now it's time for you to get back into civilian life.
Civilian life was, I had to go back to school, and luckily I was able to get into, actually I got into Rider College in Trenton, and then I transferred over to Stockton State. But getting back to school was very difficult, not only academically, but it was difficult because of the fact that I had to hide who I was. You couldn't let anyone know that you were ex-military because the protests going on. Mm-hmm. I mean, we faced protests when we got into Fort Lewis, the Seattle-Tacoma airport. There was people all over throwing things at us and yelling and screaming. And you had to travel in Class A, so they knew who you were. You were a prime target. But now that I'm a civilian, I don't have to wear a uniform anymore. You let your hair grow longer, right. So you become one of them because you don't want to have to face what they're telling you that you know is not true. So you just kind of bow your head and just go about your business. And that's pretty much what most of the vets were facing when they came home. And that's why you find a lot of them still won't even talk about the experience. But it was a terrible experience.
Yeah, that was the, well, yeah, some people say it wasn't lost there, it was lost here. But now you look back, and you have to be proud of what you did for your country, your fellow man.
We didn't know what the war was about, but what we were doing, we were proud of being supportive of each other over there in the military and willing to give our lives for each other over there. I'm sure if you talk to people today about Korea, they would say, well, what was that about? What was that? I mean, we basically, the military, whether it's Navy, Army, Marine, Air Force, you know, we're there to serve and to do something. And we may not understand the big picture, and I still don't understand Vietnam. I don't understand Korea. I don't understand all the loss of life. there's a frustration to not knowing it. But yeah, I am proud of what I did, which is why I wrote the book. And I'm proud of people like you that come up and give us a chance to say something, and to get our story out. I think that's important. Too much of what we have today, and especially with the book, is lost when we die. My father died. I've got 3 paragraphs of what he did in World War II, which is significantly more important than anything I've ever done in Vietnam.
And it could be volumes.
Yeah,
Could have been
and
volumes.
I didn't want that to happen. So 13 years ago, I just started writing. I started writing articles, and then it transformed into a book. And the book brought me here, and here I am. So I'm happy to be here.
No, it's true. I think some people forget, no matter what the skirmish is, no matter what the conflict is, that anyone who joins the military signs a blank check up to and including their life.
Sure.
And that's important for people to know. But Jack, it's been a great experience. I could talk to you for another 2 hours. But ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed this conversation we had, please pick up the book, Incoming, by Jack Doc Manick. It's a great book. I picked it up, as I said, I couldn't put it down. I mean, and Jack actually brings you into Vietnam. There's times where I was sad, the angel on the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
There were times when I laughed with the cat come running out.
Yeah.
But it's a great book. I urge you, Jack, where can we get the book?
Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or through the publisher, authorhouse.com. Or if you want a personalized copy, contact me. I've got some at home. But I enjoyed writing the book, and I've enjoyed speaking with you and being here. So
It's a
been
great
pleasure.
read. It's a great
Thank
read.
you.
Jack, it's been great having you here. Interesting story, interesting book. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back again with Woodbridge Veterans Project.